Of all the voyages thus far, this was said to be the strangest and most fun-filled set of adventures. The summer retreat, as it was titled, consisted of 3 voyages with Mother Ayahuasca and 1 voyage with what is colloquially called voyaging. Voyaging is a departure from ayahuasca in that it substitutes the DMT containing part of the mixture with psilocybin mushrooms or truffles. The MAO inhibitor remains the same brew as a liquid. Then, after a short period, you eat, chew and swallow the truffles. More on this later. Comment. There is a witch hunt on in most of Europe presently, 2019 to 2020, against those who organise and or participate in spiritual retreats or gatherings that use entheogens or medicine plants as part of their spiritual ceremonies. This, of course, is nothing new to European authorities and the current set of statist racketeers until the state finds ways to profiteer from spiritual gatherings and the medicines plants used, which are taken from the profits of pharmaceutical and medical industrial complex. The witch hunt will continue. Mother Ayahuasca is the target of the most recent witch hunt in Europe, and as a consequence, many groups are opting to use psilocybin mushrooms or truffles as a DMT substitute. Aside from the voyaging or journeying with medicine plants at the summer retreat, there were plenty of alternative and intermittent workshops on things such as breathwork, core wound, soul retrieval, voice expression, moving, dance, sound, shaking, vibration, laughter, yoga, relaxing, meditation, and, of course, mini sharing groups, one of my favorite things to participate in. The retreat was for 7 days and was a totally immersive experience. This adventure began with the usual flight delays, which were soon forgotten upon landing at Schiphol Airport and meeting up with 2 new friends to travel on with to the retreat destination. Once we had connected to the airport, we got chatting and became pretty chilled out about our final leg of the journey. As a consequence of our chatting and chilling, we were probably the last 3 people to arrive to the retreat venue late that night. It was a good thing we were all staying indoors in dorms, as none of us were in a fit state to put tents in the dark and in the typical Dutch misty rain. On the plus side though, being later than most meant there was no queue for the showers, so with a quick wash it was off to bed, only to be kept awake for most of the rest of the night by mosquitoes. This voyage was set out with voyages planned for day 2, first voyage with Mother Ayahuasca, day 4, first voyage with Voyaging, truffles, day 5, second voyage with Mother Ayahuasca, and day 6, third voyage with Mother Ayahuasca. This is not to say that voyages were more of an important aspect of the week's retreat than, say, the breathing, dancing, meditation, shaking, yoga, or sharing practices. On the contrary, the voyages were made all the better because of the preparation work, exercises, and practices. In the evening, after the first day's activities and the day before our first voyage with Mother Ayahuasca, the usual smokers are outside at Smoker's Corner, including me, with a couple of newly found friends. After some very interesting discussions, we collectively decided that we needed tobacco, so all 3 of us headed out for a walk to the nearest shop being a garage nearly 5 miles or thereabouts from the venue. We 3 intrepid explorers headed off into the wilds of the Dutch very, very flat lands. This is not to say we crossed fields, ditches, rivers or mountains, as there are no mountains in Holland. We stuck to very, very, very long, straight and flat roads entirely, risking our lives in the bicycle lanes, which many of the passerby cyclists were none too impressed with. Who would have thought that bicycle bells could be so loud or sound so aggressive? There is a lesson here: don't mess with Dutch cyclists or their cherished cycle lanes. Red means dead. Anyway, after surviving a few near misses, we got deeply immersed in hearing the sounds of our own voices, and after about 2 very short hours, we emerged on foot upon a large garage with a small, neat town attached. We piled into the garage shop and got tobacco, coffee, water, and a very small amount of chocolate. Talk about breaking the law. We sat for a while with our spoils, chatted some more, and replenished ourselves, then headed off back to our retreat. It was dark when we got back, and we were all fit for bed. It had taken us approximately 5 hours to complete our childish adventure. Taking our lives into our own hands, travelling via Dutch cycle lanes and passing by a viciously massive tied-up dog, but we braved it all and arrived back in one piece, with our just rewards, plenty of tobacco, some bottles of water, and a little chocolate. It had all been worth it. It's good to be exhausted the night before a voyage. It helps you relax and surrender. Summer retreat, first voyage with Mother Ayahuasca. Our room was a massive canvas tent. On the morning of the first voyage, it was quite a breezy weather, and the facilitators weren't sure if the ceremony would be held in the large tent outside or inside the main building. In the late morning, the wind died down substantially, so we all piled into a big tent in a field with 50 or so people together, which at first seemed quite cramped, but of course, once we had imbibed the ayahuasca and began our chakra meditation, none of us were aware or cared how many people were around or next to us. This massive tent became our tribal teepee, which was probably the idea from the outset. There was a woman dressed in the traditional garb of a North American Indian that had lit and was attending to a campfire outside, in case any of us wished to wander out during the ceremony to sit and stare at burning logs. Meanwhile, back in the teepee, we all downed our first, second, and some of us our third glass of ayahuasca, perhaps as a result of residential exhaustion from the long walk the day before. Ayahuasca kept me relatively sedated and still throughout this voyage, allowing me to ride the waves of vibration in a very deep state of awareness. It felt like an undercover reconnaissance mission. My voyage was drawn upwards towards the ceiling of our giant teepee, which flared with colour and patternation. You could see the sun through the canvas and through the blindfold. My sense of hearing increased acutely and became turned into nature, to the wind, the mist against the canvas, the trees and their leaves, the birds, the bees, the dragonflies, and at one stage a helicopter which seemed to be hovering in the sky above us, perhaps observing us for some strange reason. The helicopter was an intrusion upon an expedition of natural sound and concentrated observation. A few bangs on the ear from my childhood days and my teenage penchant to stand close to big speakers when loud music was played had mysteriously caused me to develop tinnitus in the right ear only. Every now and then, my ear would ring a very high-pitched ring, or would sometimes buzz with a very low frequency of something resembling the sound of a distant sea. It was never a bother to me, although it sometimes conveniently interferes with me hearing what some people have to say if they stand on my right side, so in many ways it is also a blessing in disguise. It now occurred to me that the high-pitched ring might have something to do with the frequency emitted from the waves of vibration of the universe, and the buzz might be intermission of those waves. Yes, this stuff sounds a little left field, but bear with me as more stuff happens later on that rounds this nicely. The waves we were tuning into with Mother Ayahuasca were all the same waves. We were just experiencing the waves at different levels of intensity, depending on our own personal sensitivities. But we were all immersed in the same sea or field of vibration together as one. Listening to the noises of others about me, my senses could pick up the ebb and flow of the waves of vibration washing over us. You could time the waves, well, at least anticipate generally when they were ebbing and flowing, through the sounds emanating in the room. My position in the teepee was very near the center, so the music came at me in stereo sound and enveloped me in a blanket of sound. This voyage was relatively smooth for me, in that there was very little, if any, specific messages coming through or about others. Perhaps this was my personal treat from Mother Ayahuasca, or perhaps she was lulling me into a false sense of security. The next voyages were not to be so mellow. After this voyage, we had a one-day break before the onslaught of the next 3 voyages. There was no shortage of workshops in dance, yoga, core wound, relaxation and meditation available. We also did a sharing group in the late morning, which of course was my favourite, and which helped me vocalise my experience of the first voyage. Equally, it was not at all mandatory to participate in any of the workshops, so you could just stand out or chill out as you felt the need. And if you didn't wish to participate in any of the voyages, there were alternative workshops available during that time also. This was very well balanced for all concerned, as there was no pressure on anyone to participate in anything only as they themselves felt the need personally. For me, the whole point of being here was to totally immerse myself in the process of voyaging or journeying with both ayahuasca and voyahuasca, with the intention of being able to write and verbally explain what this stuff was about in the most simplest terms possible. Perhaps to myself to start with, and then perhaps to others if they were prepared to listen or to read about it. Summer retreat, first voyage ever with the voyahuasca. Many years ago, sometime back in the late 80s, a friend had procured some magic mushrooms for me to try, but there were not enough mushrooms in the small pack, or perhaps the set and setting was not right to have the desired impact. Anyhow, here we all were, in our giant tribal teepee, all ready to have a go. From chatting to people over the past few days, although some people, but not all, had tried magic mushrooms in the past, none had tried truffles with an MAO inhibitor, so we were all mostly still in the dark about what it may be like, or what effects might be. We all drank the MAO inhibitor first, which still looked and tasted as nice as ayahuasca. Not. Then we began our usual chakra mantra to allow the MAO inhibitor a chance to circulate through our body system. After about 3/4 of an hour, we were offered a certain measure of dried truffles and were advised to chew them into a mush before swallowing them. They looked like a cross-section of the ayahuasca vine and didn't taste like mushrooms at all, but like very fresh, underripe hazelnuts. This taste was strangely familiar. During my childhood years, as children had foraged quite a bit on the outskirts of and in the hazelwood forests near my home, we had eaten all sorts of nuts, berries, grasses, herbs, wild vegetables, fruits and mushrooms, and these truffles did not taste like mushrooms and didn't taste like truffles either. The truffles left a metallic aftertaste once swallowed, or perhaps they were just reacting to my teeth fillings. They did not upset my taste buds or stomach. In fact, they tasted like a snack you might munch on when sitting down to watch a movie. All they needed was a little salt and they would be perfect. Sometime after eating the first course, the guides came round again, offering us another round of truffles. Of course, far be it from me to refuse. After all, it had been quite a few days since anything more solid than vegetable soup had passed my lips. My appetite for truffles was voracious. The guide offering me the truffles gave me a little more than originally on offer, with the warning, "On your head be it." Even still, this was relatively early into the voyage, so my body felt like it could take a little more. If nothing else, my body was feeling quite fulfilled and nourished by the truffles. My voyage with this concoction of the MAOI and the truffles had begun more or less with the first round of truffles, but the second top-up of truffles took me away entirely. The music we were surrounded and enveloped with was entirely different and unique. It seemed to be a fusion of jazz, punk, classical rock and house music, underlayered tones with tones of beta and theta, waves of vibration of some sort. It was totally new to me and brought me to a completely different dimension of reality. This dimension was most certainly not as earthy or ethereal as Mother Ayahuasca, but seemed way beyond that entirely. For me, it was a far smoother and a far more distant ride. We went beyond the earthly existence, perhaps to the universe, beyond the stars, and Ayahuasca began to provide me with visuals of the context of space-time and the spiritual quantum physics or quantum mechanics of existence. It showed me a spiral galaxy, then a rice cracker, then another spiral galaxy, then another rice cracker. An interchanging visual spectrum of spiral galaxies and rice crackers. Then rice crackers stacked in a packet with a kind of an enclosed hole down the center. Then the rice crackers separated and transposed into what looked like a stacked set of chakras, and there was me, nodding away at all this new stuff, as if to suggest it was making sense. Over and over, on and on, this went. It just wouldn't let go of its grip on me, almost forcing me to observe and download. Eventually, somewhere in the distance, the lead facilitator was calling time to close out the ceremony to bring everyone back to this plane of reality. Wow. This was a different aspect of voyaging that was wholly unanticipated and unimagined. Although it was an extremely smooth experience, it was completely exhausting, yet deeply thought-provoking. Whilst this experience made absolutely no sense to me at all when we arrived back in the tribal teepee from our first ayahuasca voyage, later that night, about 2 or 3 hours of lucid dreaming and processing, it came back to me and had to be shared with whomever was prepared to listen. After awakening from my lucid dreams, and this was not a gentle awakening, my body sat me bolt upright, found my clock and slippers, and brought me into the main dining area, where there was a friend sitting awaiting my arrival, of course with his permission. We sat, he listened, and allowed me to tell him of my voyage. We sat at one of the dinner tables, took a rice cracker out of its packet, pierced a hole through the centre of it, and explained the following. The rice cracker is a circular disc and has an uneven and undulating surface. The disc shape represents a spiral galaxy with its hole at the centre as a still point or 0 point. The undulating surface represents the outbound and inbound waves of vibration of its spirals. The rice cracker also represents any of your chakras when you voyage using ayahuasca, in this case, voyaging. The medicine carries you to the edge of the cracker and no further until you surrender, and in which case it will then lift you to a higher plane or level above the surface of the cracker, where you can surf upon its waves to its center, to its still or 0 point. In its stillness, you can traverse directly to other still points, to other dimensions. These other dimensions can be your own chakras or other people's chakras, and potentially to other cosmic dimensions and anything beyond these realms. By accessing other people's chakras, we can feel their suffering and their bliss, empathize with them, identify each other's blockages, and help each other to heal. This is interdimensional or multiverse travel. Linear time, as it is conventionally called, does not exist and has no meaning. The past, present, and future are not recognized as distinct or separate. All parts of the universe and the multiverse are interconnected by these still points that we can all access internally, and with a little practice and guidance, we can all do this at will. These still points were not connected by what is sometimes described as wormholes that you might travel through at great speeds. Speed was not relevant, it was instantaneous, like appearing in more than one dimension or places at the same time. Much like the quantum entanglement phenomenon of particles existing in two spaces at once. You were popping in and out without thought, will, or effort. These are the most ancient of point ways, which were established before thought itself. You were drawn in and out of the points effortlessly. Everything was effortless. All this revelation by a humble rice cracker. My friend listened, asked some questions for clarity, and listened again. He then told me of his own voyage and what my interpretation of Ayahuasca meant to him, how it resonated and provided him with context for his own voyage. We sat and continued to chat, sipping our lukewarm herbal tea and smoking some rolling tobacco into the late hours of the morning, until more people joined us for breakfast, and we all began the day's preparation for our third voyage. This time we would to be back in the arms of Mother Ayahuasca. As a side note, mushrooms or truffles are a fruit of what is called the Mycelium network. These fungi contain in and of themselves a complete set of building blocks of the Mycelium network itself. Mycelium is a multicellular, highly evolved, intelligent organism that begins building/growing on the micro level and can evolve and build their fruit, mushrooms, truffles, etc. at the macro level. They break down dead and rotting matter and nurture, feed, protect, and inform healthy matter at all scales and levels. A mycelium network can be encompassed in millimeters and can also expand to hundreds if not thousands of miles. Like any good network, it holds a wealth of knowledge about everything it touches or comes into contact with. It originally evolves to all its environments, way beyond the capacity of all and any other known organisms. In short, life on this planet would not exist without it. Well, certainly not as we know it thus far. When you take psilocybin mushrooms or truffles with the prescribed MAO inhibitor, you are tapping into the mycelium network of consciousness. This network is what feeds, nurtures, and informs all organic and non-organic matter on this planet. This includes all the constituent ingredients contained in an ayahuasca brew. This is certainly noteworthy and worthy of more study, to say the least. Summer retreat, third voyage with Mother Ayahuasca. Even before we imbibed the ayahuasca, it felt like this voyage had begun. Mother Ayahuasca began bringing me straight into a still point, then into another still point, and then another and another. After each view or visit of a still point, she would take me out of the voyage, back into this earthly realm, and get me to beckon a guide over to give them the information from each of the visits to each of the still points. This information was not about me. It was about specific people in the room, information for the guides that might assist them in working with some of the people in the room, their blockages, challenges, and their connections with others. Sometimes the guide would need to take me out of the teepee to allow me to explain in depth and volume about my individual experiences. The feelings and the information that followed was very specific and very direct. It identified root causes of blockages relevant to people's energy centers and chakras, and what might be done to assist or guide people towards clearing them, if they were finding it all too challenging in that particular moment. The first guide who took me out of the teepee had to get the okay from the lead facilitator, which she duly permitted. Some of the guides were quite surprised by my lucidity, but the fact is, Mother Ayahuasca seems to only allow me to go back into a voyage when the information has been shared. It was my version of dispelling, purging, or relieving myself. Of course, being outside was also an opportunity to smoke tobacco and at least temporarily ground myself before the next onslaught. Not all of the information was about people who were voyaging, some of it was about and for the guides themselves. Towards the end of this voyage, one of the guides who had kindly accompanied me to talk before our walk back into the teepee asked me in all sincerity, "Do you see things?" My answer being, "No, it's more like a feeling of things." And that is what it is, a feeling, or a sense of feeling, through resonance and vibration. The whole voyage was all about others. Mother Ayahuasca was getting me used to coming in and out of a voyage to express in a conscious manner information gleaned about other voyages, which allowed me to dispel that energy and go back into a voyage. Nothing in this voyage directly related to me, and although exhausting, it was invigorating and exciting. It felt like an on-off, magnificent training session with the best coach in the universe, and with enormous learning and substance to it. Although this may all seem a bit weird, and does seem weird even to me now to be writing about it, and at the time it felt really organic and natural. This in part is due to the setting and the environment created by the guides and facilitators, which was one of trust and non-judgment. Summer retreat, final voyage with Mother Ayahuasca. At this stage, my body was feeling exhausted, although still relatively relaxed. It properly longed for a break from voyaging into the realms of vibration of other people's stuff, and longed for a bit more me time. Although there were second thoughts arising in me the night before and doing this final voyage, my inner resolve to complete my journey was superior to my thoughts. It felt like there was still something deep inside me that still needed to be resolved, faced, or embraced. We began this final voyage with the usual preparations, the chakra meditation, and the imbibing of ayahuasca. After about 5.5 hours of voyaging into still points of other voyages, and many talks with the guides to unburden my feelings and the messages, a certain guide appeared in our giant teepee. When she arrived, something prompted me to sit up, take off my blindfold, and go over and talk to her. We went outside for a walk and a chat, and a quick smoke of some tobacco, but she didn't smoke. When we came back, she sat beside me in complete stillness, with me drifting off soon enough. This was one of the guides that had previously sat with me at the guide training voyage in Portugal. Her ability to be in her own stillness relaxed me sufficiently to allow me to drift back into another final voyage with Mother Ayahuasca just for me. During this phase of my stillness, Mother Ayahuasca took me to meet an uncle of mine that had passed away approximately 30 years ago. This uncle had been a very kind man and a huge support to me as a child and young adult. He used to buy me comic books to encourage me to read and discuss a great many topics including English literature, philosophy, psychology, science, music, nature, and spirituality. He had also studied astrology and tarot cards, and sometimes done star charts and tarot card readings for me. Since his passing, he had appeared to me many times in my dreams, and here he was, appearing to me once again. When he passed, he had suffered immense pain for a time leading up to his death, and without going into any detail here, it was not possible for me to get to see him when he was passing. He informed me he had always watched over me and had guided me whenever necessary, and would continue to do so. In essence, he was acting as my spirit guide. This revelation brought up a well of emotion in me, a heady mixture of sadness and happiness combined. Sadness for his pain, fear and suffering, my sadness for losing him, and now my happiness to know he was okay and had done so much for me in the intervening years. These emotions came out in my tears as my body curled up into the fetal position and sobbing overtook me. 30 years of sadness came out in the space of 30 minutes and was still coming out, when another guide attended to me and comforted me by rubbing my shoulder and neck. Eventually, when my tears began to subside, the guide guided me outside to talk. In between my tears, she heard the story of my uncle and how and why he had died. We chatted and joked for some time. Then the guide told me that during my stillness and before my sobbing had begun, 2 giant dragonflies landed on my head, crawled around a bit, then lay perfectly still with me for quite some time, which she thought was quite an unusual sight to behold. We joked that perhaps these 2 dragonflies represented something spiritual as an insect spirit guide of some sort, or perhaps they just liked the combined stench of tobacco, sweat, and ayahuasca coming off my head. Towards the end of this conversation and a bucket full of happy tears, we were invited to return to our tribal teepee for closing ceremony, and that was that. Here ended my summer retreat voyages of 2019. The next day there was a closing ceremony and a massive buffet put on, all of which was missed by me and a few of my new friends, as we all had relatively easy flights to catch home. Elements/revelations of voyages 10 to 13. My tinnitus is not so much a curse anymore. It seems to facilitate sensitivity to certain frequencies of vibration. We all experience the same waves of vibration at all times, but we are not all tuned in at the same moments, and thus we can perceive a disparity or a duality in our connection with each other and all. You can pick up the ebb and flow of vibration through the collective resonance of a group of people who more or less have the same form of intent. Truffles don't taste like mushrooms or truffles per se, they taste more like fresh, unripened hazelnuts. Spiral galaxies, chakras, and rice crackers are all one and the same. Still points or 0 points are a pathway to other realms and dimensions, and time has no relevance to this form of interdimensional travel. Voyaging seems less earthly than ayahuasca and is geared towards knowledge or gnosis beyond the eternal dimensions. More study on mycelium required. It is possible to be informed and guided by Mother Ayahuasca to serve and help heal others. Visuals are messages for me, and feelings are for others, which seems to be the way it is at present, but all that may also change. Have now found a potential insect spirit guide in the giant Dutch dragonfly, and another spirit guide in my departed, but not entirely gone, uncle. Who would have thought any of this possible? Certainly not me. On being home from all this voyaging stuff, have decided presently that there is no need for my imminent return to voyaging with medicine plants. Have decided instead to concentrate my efforts on writing and journaling whatever is relevant to me on an irregular basis. Have also decided to study shamanism in greater depth and all that this may encompass. Would love at some point to write about some people's experiences and adventures with medicine plants, providing of course they are gracious enough to allow me to. But that may be a story for yet another day. The experiences of voyaging with medicine plants or entheogens has directed and made my life fuller, more meaningful, quite exciting, and often very entertaining. My hope is that other people who know me well or who are around me regularly see this as something better than was there before.